The next speaker is Francesco Nerini. He's an associate professor at KTH in Sweden, in Stockholm, and he will be presenting about how climate and energy policies affect broader sustainable development outcomes. I believe he's already in this call. Francesco?
Yes, here.
Oh, hi, welcome.
Thank you.
And yes, you can start sharing the screen. Perfect.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, actually, my topic fits very well with Nadia's point on that you have to understand this holistic, complex world to create good solutions, else you might create more problems than the one that you initially were addressing. And I guess my presentation is all about that. So first of all, let's start from a bit of background. I hope you're all familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals agreed by nearly all states of the United Nations in 2015, and their visionary goal that encompass 169 targets to be achieved by 2030. So they encompass a vision on prosperity, including goals on poverty, education, equality, but also about, of course, energy and climate and other systems that we study. So a lot of work has been going on in the research community, so let's say from my side, but also in the international community and at the governmental level in various parts of the world, to try to use the information that you have in these goals to frame and harmonize research policy and projects. So yeah, basically what we were saying about understanding a complex world, the SDGs kind of give and help to do that, because maybe you have a project within SDG 7, which is about clean energy, affordable and clean energy. But also you can use the detail here to try to understand how it relates with all these other systems. So a bit more on that in a little bit. Just to say, this is quite an exciting field of research. These are some of the papers or the studies that I've been involved with. And I'm showing this just to flag that these are not easy tasks to do, because when you want to understand, for instance, how an energy project relates to all these other dimensions, you need people helping you experts in all these dimensions. So that's why all these studies have various authors. And these authors usually are experts from natural, social sciences, maybe also lawyers. Among these authors, we had, for instance, the head modeler of the International Energy Agency, people working at the UN organization, and so on and so on. So just to say, it's very useful to collaborate and have this to help you having this holistic view, because it's very difficult for one person to have the knowledge across all these dimensions. As I guess this seminar focuses on climate and energy, I wanted to give you some examples on how decisions around climate change, but also about energy projects, can be then related to many other aspects, and that knowledge about these aspects is really crucial to do these projects in a way that, again, doesn't create more problems than the one you are addressing. I will go very fast about the methods. We have only 15 minutes. But basically, what we do in this kind of studies is trying to understand these questions, for instance, how climate change will affect various aspects, by reading and analyzing each one of the 169 targets that are in the Sustainable Development Goals. So just in practice, without going too much into academic language, basically we do 169 micro-literature review, which are driven by experts, to try to understand, for instance, in this case, how for that specific target, for instance, target 1.1 is by 2030, eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere. So we try to understand, for instance, how climate change can affect that target, or on the other hand, how climate action, which is action against climate change, so mitigation adaptation, can either help achieving that target or actually create more problems. This is quite an iterative exercise in which these answers are first looked in literature, but then discussed by the various experts that are involved in this study. Here's just a bit of results from this first exercise. So here we try to understand how current and future climate change would affect the delivery of all the SDGs. So in this representation, you can see all the SDGs here in the logos. Each one of the numbers and letters here represent a target within that SDG. So for instance, SDG 1 has 5 targets plus 2 supporting targets, A and B. And every time you see a red highlighting here, it means that we found studies saying that the delivery of that target would have been affected by climate change. And here you can see something really worrisome, that actually climate change can affect all but 1 targets in the Sustainable Development Goals. Just some example, where climate change has very strong implication on social justice. You might have seen poorest are actually, unfortunately, the most vulnerable people. Poorer people and also poorer countries. Climate change increases inequalities because, again, as poorer people are the most affected, then the gap between the poorest and the richest becomes higher. And also it has been shown there are already and there will be more and more climate-driven conflicts. Climate change can affect health issues. Actually, spreading of diseases has been linked to climate change, actually, and people have even tried to trace pandemic to deforestation and climate change and ecological issues. It creates more disasters and also is linked to malnutrition. Also, climate change affects food systems, so it can lower the productivity of agricultural lands. And of course, it affects the environment. There are big effects on ecosystems due to climate change across the world. Some examples are sea temperature changes and acidification, degradation of mountain ecosystems, desertification, and the increase of invasive species. On the other hand, so up to that point, we see in the research that we did with various international organizations that climate change, while climate change might affect the delivery of all goals, we also found that climate action, so again, action against climate change, can have a lot of synergies across the Sustainable Development Goals. So it means that action against climate change could enable or support the achievement of 134 targets of over 169. And also we found some trade-offs. So again, these are cases in which your climate policies, for instance, renewable energy or adaptation projects, could actually create frictions or problems across these systems. And again, I think this is particularly interesting, again, reconnecting to the topic before. So how sometimes solutions, if not investigated properly, can create problems. Some example of the positive aspects of addressing climate change is that climate action can enable and reinforce building prosperous, equal, and peaceful societies. It has many co-benefits, for instance, on health. Many people living in polluted area can see how life is different when that is not happening. It has co-benefits on energy and water systems, and also it enables achieving efficient, smart, and secure societies. And also, it's necessary for environmental targets to be met. However, at the same time, something that I think is even more important to investigate is how actions and policies and projects for addressing climate change could actually create problems in certain parts of the world. The one that I guess is most intuitive is that climate action can be costly in the short term. So while there are many studies that show that in the long term, adapting to climate change and reducing the emissions reduces a lot the societal costs of climate change, at the same time, changing fast your energy system can be costly, also depending on where you are in the world. And the second one is also very important. It can impact fuel-dependent economies. So if you're in a country where your income or your GDP is half or 70% dependent on fossil fuels, then climate action, it probably will affect, or diverting from fossil fuel will probably affect a lot your economy. And some things are even less straightforward. So for instance, we found that climate action could favor large agricultural producers. This because maybe smallholders, small farms have less economic capability of doing climate change measures compared to very large farms, and thus create inequalities. These are just a couple of examples. If you go in these studies, you will find, 169 evaluations with a lot of detail, which I cannot go into detail in. But again, this is to say, it's very good. So the message up to climate change is bad for all SDGs, and climate action is potentially enabling most SDGs. Up to here, I think it's all, everybody can agree and get on board on this. But at the same time, the understanding of how certain climate policies and certain or renewable energy policies can affect certain part of the world, it's a crucial understanding to then not stop them, and also to have these projects in the best possible way. From climate, just a quick focus then on energy projects. We did a similar study with different authors trying to understand in specific within climate projects how projects related to energy systems could affect all the sustainable development goals. In brief, these are the results. This is a slightly different representation of the same type of results. Also here we did 169 evaluations, trying to understand all the targets that could be enabled or add synergies with the pursuit of SDG 7, which tries to achieve universal access to electricity, increase renewables, and increase energy efficiency. And at the same time, to understand how actions within SDG 7 could create trade-offs across the sustainable development goals. Here you can see right away that also in this case, there are many more synergies and trade-offs, which again is a good news. Around 85% of the SDG targets can be enabled by actions in energy. And nearly half of those can have trade-offs. But again, remember, one trade-off, if it's very important, can stop your energy project or can create very bad consequences. Again, some examples when looking at energy systems. So, well, SDG 7 includes a target on achieving universal access to electricity and clean cooking fuels. So if you imagine access to electricity is essential to power hospitals, schools, and water and sanitary systems. It has many having modern energy access, renewable energy access, and efficient systems. It can have potential beneficial effects on the function of food and water system, medical facilities, but also on sustainable cities. And also, many environmental targets will be affected by achieving this target. So for instance, there are many million deaths a year related to indoor air pollution. And on the other hand, renewable and efficient energy system can address those problems and reduce those deaths. At the same time, again, it's important to consider the trade-offs. You might think that from a monosectorial point of view, you might think that your project, your energy project is perfect. But then when you look at it across topics and across disciplines, you might find something unexpected. Just some examples of the most famous, let's say, if you have a big energy projects, for instance, hydropower or biomass, you might have potential trade-off with local communities. So for instance, one of the most famous examples is when big hydropower project, of course, increase your share of renewable energy, but at the same time, it might need to relocate villages and a lot of people. And so on and so on. I don't think I have too much time. I just wanted to go more into how this knowledge that up to now that I presented.
5 minutes left.
Yes, I think I'll make it. So how this knowledge that at the time is really at the global level is being now used to actually frame and direct policies and projects. So here we are actually working with governments and some UN organizations to try to understand how to enable stakeholders in understanding this difficult world that we live in, and make projects and policies that are not monosectorial, but try to understand the implications of the decisions that are made. And this is just an example. So right now we are developing, also collaborating with UNOPS, which is the UN Office for Project Services, some tools to try to understand how a project might affect all the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. So trying to do what I showed to you at the global level, however, in this case, at the project level and guided by a tool. So just very quickly, this is the tool that we developed, is published, and you can all try it. It is a questionnaire, for instance, asking you which type of energy source you have, is it renewable or not, what kind of energy, hydro, solar, wind, in which country, and then a bunch of questions, yes and no questions about the project itself. And for instance, I'll show you results about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. So the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is a very controversial project. It's one of the biggest hydropower plants being built in East Africa, well, in the world, but this is in East Africa. It is in Ethiopia, but it's very controversial because it has water right issues. It has issues for controlling the Nile, so it has created geopolitical tensions with neighboring countries, and especially Egypt. And also it has been criticized for lack of transparency. So here, for instance, I pre-filled the tool with this, with the questions about the project. We don't have time now to answer those. But I guess any of you or a group of you could answer this. And then basically what this type of tool tries to do, if it works, yes, is for the specific project to give this kind of information of how it can affect the achievement of all the SDGs, either positively or negatively. Here, of course, in the tool, then you have all the information. And in summary, this is the summary view of all the results. And I just would like to highlight some of the most interesting ones. So for instance, it has this project, which will expand electricity access in the region, will have many consequent positive effects, for instance, by replacing traditional fuels. However, it can create issues, for instance, related to transboundary water use conflicts. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go much more in detail, but a tool like this in the hand of the right policymakers can be really useful to start a discussion on how to improve the project and not do things just in your own silos, but to try to have decisions and measures that minimize the possible troubles created by any project or by any policy. And yeah, of course, it has also, the project has also been related to ecosystem disruption. Just a couple of reflections on this field of work that, well, I'm not the only one doing. There are many researchers and again, people in governmental organizations and even governments trying to do this, is that looking at the Sustainable Development Goals is quite useful because there is quite a lot of detail there, and they can be used as a lens to understand the implication of one project or one policy. So don't see it too much as an international agreement, see it even as a list of topics that you can, or a list of sectors that you can check to understand and relate to whatever you're doing. And being so, they're a valuable starting point for decision makers to select the dynamics of interest and start a dialogue on how to harmonize all these different and sometimes conflicting objectives. I'll not go in depth on this, but of course, without forgetting some limitations of the Sustainable Development Goals. They're a political compromise. They're not a list of every possible priority in the world. However, they're a very good starting point, again, to look across topics. So yeah, that was it for now, and I'm really happy to stay for the discussion.
Thank you, Francesco, for your presentation.